Well, my name's Steven Lewis Simpson, and I'm originally from Aberdeen. And I guess it was in my late teens when I sort of first picked up a camera. It was probably, I think, 17. And it was nothing more than at that time I was kind of a big fan of a lot of Hong Kong cinema. I loved the work of Jackie Chan and that sort of thing, and was very much into martial arts. So I picked up a camera to choreograph some fight scenes and had a lot of fun doing that. And then as it progressed from there, I started getting more and more interested actually in the art of cinema and not in the action side. And then started getting exposed to some of the greats like Kurosawa and that sort of thing, and started getting more and more involved that way. And then the first screenplay I ever wrote turned out to be a very intense character drama, so it was kind of a million miles away from the kind of road that got me in there. Well, I mean, I grew up in Aberdeen, and the first time I left was when I was 18, but that wasn't for film. That was to become a stockbroker and a trader on the stock markets. So I did that for a little while when I was 18 into 19, and then I returned to Aberdeen then, and became a dealer and then head dealer for Abtrust, which is part of Aberdeen Asset Management, which is a pretty prominent company now in town. And then when I was 22, I got out of that and then moved to Los Angeles. And there was only one producer that I wanted to start with in the film business to get experience, and that was Roger Corman. I was kind of very aware, I think, growing up of, sort of his place in film history and film lore, and so I kind of wanted to follow that path. And so I went over there for a little while and interned for him at the head office, then the studio, and learned a lot quickly. And the whole process was broken open really. And he made productions so quickly, smoothly, and easily that it was really a case of, well, why not? It's not this sort of big holy grail that it is made out to be in terms of making a movie elsewhere. And so then after that, I returned from there, and within about 4 months of returning, I was in production on my first feature film, which was Ties, which was shot in Aberdeen. And my 4 key crew members came over from Los Angeles, because at that point, there pretty much had been nothing being shot in Scotland. I mean, that was 1993. And so crew-wise, there was nothing. I mean, Shallow Grave and I, we were kind of shooting pretty much at exactly the same time. And I imagine probably pretty much most of their crew they'd even brought up from London. And tied with the Americans, we also had some people with sort of mid-level experience who came up from Edinburgh, focus pullers, that sort of thing. And then we had a group of people, about 6 from Aberdeen, who I'd done things with before on an amateur basis, but had never professionally worked in the industry. They all had careers elsewhere. And after Ties, funnily enough, all 6 are now full-time professional in the film and television industry, although most are either based out of London or wherever now. But it was kind of an interesting catalyst for people there. Yeah, that was a very, very intense character drama. And I mean, I shot it here, and nobody had ever done a feature film here at that point, and it's still the only one that was shot on film that's shot in Aberdeen. But I mean, it was a universal story. I could have shot it anywhere, and I think that's sort of a theme with sort of all my work. You could pretty much do most of them anywhere. It's just finding somewhere different. Well, yeah, I mean, it worked well for me though, logistically, in some respects. It was funny going forward into it, because you start off with your budget, and it's kind of what it's likely, realistic. And in those days, there wasn't Scottish Screen, there wasn't Film Council, there was the Scottish Film Production Fund. And so the moment I got back to Scotland, I sent them the script, and I kept phoning them up saying, have you read it yet, have you read it yet, and no, we'll get back to you, we'll get back to you. Now, by the time we were in production, they still hadn't read the script yet. Now, bearing in mind there were only 2 feature films made in the entire country that year, it kind of shows how there was nothing at that time. I mean, it was funny because a few months later I was at the BAFTA Awards in the VIP room after, and this woman was chatting to me, and I was telling her about the film, and she said, "Oh, that sounds fabulous. You really ought to contact us, if you need any help." And this was the head of the Scottish Film Production Fund, and I took great pleasure in telling her how long I've been waiting for them to just simply read a script. So it became clear early on when I got back that funding wasn't really going to be forthcoming, and it was really a case of how much money did I have. And then because I'd saved and invested a bit from my stockbroking days, not a lot, but enough. And then one day I popped into Grampian Television and spoke to this wonderful guy who was there at the time called Eric Johnson, who handled the facilities. And I was going in to find out how much it would cost to rent some lights. And by the end of it, he'd taken me on a full tour and had shown me how they had film cameras, film editing, sound, everything was there, great lights. And so we did a deal where we did a swap of equipment for rights, for broadcast rights. And that became the foundation of the equipment side of the budget, which was not insubstantial. And then it was just really a case of feeding the camera. I mean, the people that came over from the States flew themselves over. I mean, it was, that involved in that sense. And it was in the days where, pretty much no actor had done a movie, so people were willing just to do it for the screen time. So it didn't cost a lot. If digital or if HD was around then, I'd have shot it on HD instead of film any day of the week, because there are too many compromises when you're shooting on a low budget with film, for the most part, depending on how you structure the shoot. So yeah. The film was premiered at the Edinburgh Film Festival about 11 months after the shoot, and which was actually reasonably quick, considering there was no post-production support or finance or that sort of thing. I mean, one thing that sort of also happened, which the day after the end of principal photography, which is kind of the best, it kind of feels like the best day of your life because you got your life back. Then I get a phone call from the lab, and we had gone from sending the film down every sort of 3 days reasonably responsibly, but still cost effectively, to sending the last sort of 10 days down in one go, and get informed that it has been damaged, possibly beyond recognition, but they don't know yet. So I'm thinking I might have gone through all of this for nothing, because if it's gone, the crew had already, they flew out the next day. I mean, it was, we couldn't reconstruct. As it turned out, the damage wasn't too severe, but it was still noticeable on some of it. So as compensation, and labs normally are terrible at compensation, but they did agree to compensate me by covering all my post-production costs for free, which with film adds up. So that was another way in terms of how the budget, the budget was probably, in real terms, would have been about 3 times what the cash budget in fact was. But when I put that lab deal next to the Grampian Television support, it kind of really balances itself out there. But if I shot it on HD and I already had the HD camera, it would have cost nothing. It really wouldn't have. Well, I mean, I had a couple of other scripts. I mean, the problem is, the first thing you do is you try and take it out to the market and see how it responds. And in those days, it was very, very thin in terms of distribution out of the UK and internationally. And so I mean, even when I was in post-production, I was about 9 months into post, and I went out to Cannes with just basically a rough copy on tape. And the funny thing was that at that point, pretty much no UK company would even look at it. And I think part of the reason that the UK film business struggled for so many years is they just couldn't pull their finger out. Um, whereas at the same time, I was struggling to get a UK distributor, even just to say, hey, let us look at it. I would still get, I got a phone call from Columbia Pictures asking to see it, or, in Cannes, I went round door to door, had a miserable time because basically everyone's just send us the tape, not interested, to just do that. And then my final day, I thought, well, I'll go and see if I can speak to somebody at Miramax, because that was their golden year at Cannes. It was the year they won the Pulp Fiction and everything else. They were buying everything. So I thought, well, why not? So I went by their office, and it was pandemonium, unlike any other office I'd been in, absolute chaos. And there was this guy, and he was always like, hold on a second, hold on a second. After about 10, 15 minutes, he was like, hold on a second. All right, now come into the room. And he gave me about 20 minutes off the street, which is, normally you get 15 minutes in Cannes once you're in the diary. And he was very interested. He told me how to deal with and whatever else. So, a few months later, when the film's finished, I send it to the relevant person there. She sends a letter back. She loves it. So we have a meeting. She comes to another screening. She's still interested. And actually, the great thing, and this shows the difference between the bad companies and the good companies, when I have the meeting with her, she says, oh, by the way, Mark Tusk, who's the guy I met in Cannes, who turns out was a kind of a legend within Miramax at the time, phoned her up saying, have you seen Steve's film yet? Because that's, again, how the good companies work. They track you, all these other things. So I had 3 screenings for them, and it ended up being the sort of head out of New York below the Weinsteins that passed on it. But nobody else paid it any attention whatsoever. And, so then it was kind of back out, and, it won Best Film at a festival in France and that sort of thing. But, again, in the 90s, sadly, the majority of the British film industry was set up, in terms of support, was short films. You come in, you do shorts, you develop, and then by the time they had feature film funding coming in, they were typically funding those teams. And I've spoken to people at Scottish Screen and elsewhere about it, because I never went that route. I always have been about features. So for years, I wasn't really getting any, support there. And the other thing is, I'm a writer, director, producer, which is a nightmare for them because they like ticking 3 boxes, not 1, in terms of individuals. So for a while, it was a case of money comes together for something, money falls through, money comes together again, money falls through, in terms of equity money out of London. And this was on a project that became Resbom, which was originally set in Edinburgh, and this was about 96. And then I sort of had enough with that. I went to Indonesia, shot a quick documentary there, and then produced a film called Frog for a different director that got a couple of Scottish BAFTA nods, and was a wonderful dark fairy tale. And then, and then sort of went to other projects and developed and then financed The Ticking Man, which I did in 2001. We shot it then, which was a very high concept thriller, which we shot in Edinburgh and in the Borders region. And again, sort of unusual for a Scottish film in the sense it was a very high concept thriller, although done on a low budget without name cast. And it premiered at the Montreal World Film Festival, which is the only competitive ranked film festival in North America. And did the Ransdan, and since it's sold to, population-wise, about a third of the world. But DVD sales mostly. More like a relief, because it was a long time from the first to the second. There are a lot of things in the business that as time plays out, you learn whether something was a bad or a good thing at the time. I was incredibly relieved when I signed the sales agent's agreement for The Ticking Man, because it had been kind of a long time coming. The estimates were great and all that sort of thing. And it is quite simply, in retrospect, the worst decision of my life. I've sort of undergone 4 years of legal battles with that company since. And, it's sort of one of those lessons that most producers sadly go through. which is a hell of a lot of film sales companies out there are crooks, quite simply, a lot, and the system is structured very much in their favor. It's quite staggering, really, how it's, the trade bodies that are supposed to handle the arbitration are very much bent in their favor as well. And it's part of why, the independent finance struggles in independent film, is because it's structured for so many layers to make the money before it gets back to the producers and the investors. And that's why we need to see a new business model coming out, which is emerging, and it's why a lot of filmmakers are swinging into there at the moment as well. But it's still a few years off really taking over. Well, this is the irony. I mean, when I did this deal with the sales company and I was looking at the sales projections they had signed off on, and it looked like we were going to make a lot of, relative to the budget, a lot of money on it. I mean, it's grossed more than it cost. I mean, it's technically made its money back that way, but by the time the sales agents screw you, you don't see that much of it back. But when I saw those figures, I thought, well, great. I mean, I'll go and do the sequel, because it was a beautiful continuation story-wise. It was a very, very different film. And so I did Retribution, which was actually the smoothest production I'd ever done. And I mean, literally, I started writing it in mid-December. And I mean, literally, I wrote probably about half of it on a beach in the Maldives, which is a very nice way of working, and then wrote some of it on the road while I was doing some other festivals and stuff, and started production in the last week in February. So from putting pen to paper for the first time, about 10 weeks, 9-10 weeks we were shooting the first scene, mostly because one of the actors had a year's contract with the Royal Shakespeare Company and only had 4 weeks splattered out throughout the year that he was available, and the finance was coming in as we were doing that. And Scottish Screen came back on board. They were one of the financiers of The Ticking Man, but they were really messing me around on the contract, so I went out to find alternate finance, and I literally stopped production before the final day, because they were so slow doing the paperwork that I could at least sign the contract before we'd finished shooting the film. And but in the meantime of searching for alternate finance, I did find the replacement finance for them, but they were happy to become partnership finance. So I effectively doubled the cash budget while we were in production, which was very nice because everyone was getting paid, but there was a partial deferral in there on top. So I think we're probably the only film in British history where the deferral got paid out before you even finished production. Which was very nice, and and so that was all turned over very quickly, and again premiered at the Montreal Film Festival, and then we took it out as well as for remake rights, because they were very high concept, and we started getting a lot of interest for that as well in LA. Sorry, were they? No, but fortunately by the time I did The Ticking Man, a lot more had shot in Scotland, and also some people had come into Scotland that weren't there before. The director of photography I used on The Ticking Man, we also used on Frog, and the promo Pulse, that was the opening 9 minutes that developed into Resbom. And he's a guy called Ian Dodds, and I highly rate his stuff. He's a great guy to work with apart from anything else. So there was more experience to tap into then. Likewise with actors, there were more people had been working by that point, and so so that made life a lot easier. And with Retribution, I actually pared it down even more because since the first week was before the finance had been secured, I didn't want to waste anyone's time on it. So I got the actor up from London in his week off from the RSC, and there were only a couple of supporting actors that I used that week, and the majority of things, because there was a lot of high turnover of scenes in the film, so I could shoot a lot with him on his own. So I just went out and shot it. I had the camera, and it was so liberating that I ended up shooting the rest of the movie, which wasn't my original plan. I was probably going to use the same DOP, but it was just so quick to shoot, and it worked out great. So so I ended up shooting Westbaum as well because of it. It's quite a liberating way to work, especially if you're using things that are textured in a very post-production way in terms of getting texture and look rather than purely lighting. I wouldn't shoot something myself that had great finesse over lighting unless I had an amazing gaffer to do that. So. Um, well, by that point, I mean, when I wrote it for Edinburgh, it was really a financier who said I wanted to, who wanted to do something. This is a guy that financed the promo and just failed to deliver on the rest of the finance. And the script was just a guy and a girl from different backgrounds, and in Edinburgh you can draw on that quite easily, between the girl from a housing estates and a sort of guy from pretty well off background. And by the time I'd returned to it, I had some money fall into my lap through some financiers in London that were one of the financiers of Retribution. And essentially, I could use the money to do whatever I wanted with. I could shoot anything, which is a rather nice position to be in. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was very workable. And I really had, by that time, I'd been going out to Pine Ridge Indian Reservation since the summer of '99. I've been shooting a documentary work there for a project called the Thunder Being Nation, which is now in about a 4-hour cut, needing to be whittled down and been shot over the years. And I really wanted to shoot a movie there, partly for the texture, partly the culture, and in part because people are staggeringly poor there. I mean, you can go to a town there with an average per capita income a fifth of Namibia's. I mean, this is in the United States. So for me to spend my little budget somewhere where it actually meant something to people was a big motivating factor as well. But it sort of also turned out that it meant more there in terms of, a girl from the reservation, the Oglala Lakota girl, and, white guy from, the kind of big city by South Dakotan terms. And then a lot of the local aspects sort of fed into that and sort of made it a lot more interesting and more textured and brought more life to it. And, so it was just a case of, well, that's how I'm going to do it. And at that point, part of the problem with it, one of the many problems, in a way, is that you've got an American Indian cast. American Indians are by far the most prejudiced against in Hollywood, to the point where almost none of the established American Indian actors have ever played a role that's not a generic Indian, pretty much. I mean, the only cases Adam Beach, for example, gets a starring role is when there happened to be an American Indian at a point of history like Iwo Jima. And so there's a very, very, very small pool of actors with any sort of real level of experience. So, try to find out who might fit, the roles, and that was a real challenge. But then I happened upon a episode of Smallville that was the first role ever played by an actress, Tamara Feldman, who's part American Indian and fit the role in pretty much every way, and she was quite incredible for her first on-screen performance, and it was, she was a starring guest lead in it, and yeah, I mean, and she just shone on screen, and so I started pursuing her then, and she had a very big agency behind her, and they were just messing me around, and their final word on it was, well, we're not going to send it through without you making an offer. And it's like, who is she to make an offer? I mean, she's, a very good actress, but, they were just, I think, just looking for big money roles for her at that point. And so I don't play that game, so I kind of threw that aside and started looking at other people. And then I found someone who was repped by the same manager as her, and who happened to just throw her name out in conversation, and so we got it to the manager, and within about a day, got a phone call back. She loved it and would do anything to star in it. And so that was the foundation. And then from then on, just sort of built it from there and cast the leads out of LA, but everyone else was cast locally, which is a very hard thing to do when you're dealing with, just the middle of America, not a huge, population, and you're just trying to draw people from life. Now, the thing that makes it a lot harder there is that time means very little in Indian country, and particularly on Pine Ridge. And so whenever we would prepare things in advance in terms of having somebody there a particular day, typically it didn't happen. I mean, there was one key guy that we'd auditioned and lined up, and he was in Dances with Wolves, and he had about 3-4 days notice, and then on the day itself we phone his wife, and she's like, well, he's not interested, he's not going to do it. So I phoned back trying to convince him, and she's like, well, he's out in the fields feeding his buffalo. I mean, forget about it. So we literally had to drive up to the res and knocked on the door of this guy I'd met there previously who ran a tire store. And it's like, hey, what are you doing? Well, not much. What do you want to earn some cash today? Sure. When? About an hour? Sure. I mean, it was like that. And he actually worked out well. And some of the supporting guys, we just literally would have somebody roll into the gas station cafe and just literally grab them. 10 minutes later, they were on set. And ironically, that was the most efficient way of doing it. And actually, on those occasions, they actually typically worked all right. But from a nervous breakdown standpoint, it's not ideal, because the whole point of a film is that everything's planned, everything is set. You know what's going to happen, and but the thing that I developed, because I knew the reservation pretty well, was actually just that you just have to submit yourself to that. You just have to give yourself over to it. And pretty much it all worked out. No matter how random some days were, it kind of typically worked out. So. The thing about it, the thing about Resbom was that getting through it, in a way, because I mean, the satisfaction I have isn't the creative one. It's the fact that I managed to go to somewhere where, I mean, this place is incredibly harsh. I mean, in the mid-70s, they had as high a political murder and disappearance rate as Chile under Pinochet. I mean, it was 8.5 times higher than Detroit when Detroit was considered murder capital of the U.S. I mean, it's not your typical, place in any shape or form. 80 to 85% unemployment. I mean, that's actually one of the reasons why it was very easy to get people on the day, because nobody had anything else to do. I mean, and that's just the reality of it. Plus, I have a lot of friends there, and that could smooth it over a bit in terms of tribal government and that sort of thing. But there was one day we did a scene with the guy who played the moneylender, and he was a very, very experienced actor and director. He used to direct a lot of top American TV shows in the 70s, like Barrett on Barnaby Jones and things that we're all way too young to remember. As well as a lot of TV shows for many years. And what he was best known for, though, was he was one of the leads in General Hospital in its heyday in the States. And the woman who played the mother of the lead girl is a friend of mine from the res, who, by the way, the FBI called her family one of the 2 most hostile families in the most hostile area in the United States. And on her birthday, we filmed a scene with her and Dr. Weber from General Hospital, and that was a show that she used to run home from every day from college to watch. And so she was just on cloud 9 to be there doing these scenes with them. I mean, and then my leads went to town, got her a cake and stuff, and we had a party. And it was probably the best birthday she's had in her adult life, if not her entire life. And this friend of mine, I mean, you cannot believe how harsh her life has been, from family members murdered to various other things, and she survived cancer the following year. I mean, so to drop something like that in her life as just a beautiful memory, and Tamara, my lead actress, would go out regularly the following year helping her through her cancer. Making a film is just frivolous and compared to that sort of thing, and so that grounds me totally when I think about the whole experience, and the days that were particularly hard for me getting things put together or whatever else. So we'll always have a completely separate place in my mind compared to the other films, and experiences.
I did also touch upon a lot of the issues of it wasn't just completely frivolous. You should feel like it achieved something for people as well on that front.
Yeah, I say that you're right. I mean, but the other thing that's significant about Razbom, and this isn't bigging up the film, this is shame on everyone else, is that to our knowledge, it's the first ever Universal story ever set in an American Indian reservation. Every other reservation film is culturally specific, i.e., that's why it was financed. And invariably, either coming of age or returning to culture or whatever else. And to me, that it's good that we've seen the advancement of some of these films begin to emerge, but it shows how big a cultural apartheid there still is in the film industry when there's still that separation. I mean, we need to get a point where we're setting stories, any kind of story, anywhere, whether it be a comedy or whatever it is, just any sorts of community. I mean, and I think that's sort of a bit of a theme of mine that's emerging more and more through my work is just telling kind of good, commercially minded, entertaining stories, but where the leads are ones we've perhaps not seen in those contexts before. Like there's a series I'm developing for Aberdeen, which is a drama series, and there's 6 lead women, 2 Venezuelans, a Nigerian, a Kazakhstani, an Indonesian, a Cambodian. When have you ever seen an array of people from those places on screen? But it's just ultimately set up by circumstances, but it's just a bunch of women and their lives and the city and all these other things. It's not culturally specific, and I think that's what I want to see more and more, where we're merging all of these things together, because that's the world we're living in. And film gets a little bit slow behind. I mean, it shows how bad it is where with Hitch the studio still didn't want to cast opposite the biggest movie star in the world a white woman. A Latina woman, sure, but that's how we still aren't there yet. It's quite embarrassing when you think about it. But
Can we talk about the CVs before?
the
The CVs you were just saying.
oh yeah.
How you initially got the idea
I mean, the series, the development of that was quite easy. I mean, it was just these were all people that I knew and I found incredibly interesting, and then I started compositing in a lot of other things. I mean, it's based a lot around life, but the kind of side of life you never see on screen, and actually a lot of it's a lot more entertaining. I mean, that's the sort of thing that I find really interesting, is that, and you get this every day you open the newspapers, is how reality is so much more surprising most of the time. And so I'm always plundering. I mean, a lot of my scripts are based on or a hint of a situation that was real, and then thinking, well, what if it went down this road, or what if you start compositing people together and journeys together. And but also it seemed to me it's sort of always the interesting discussions that have been going on the last few days at this film festival in Aberdeen has been over almost like, well, how can you make a film here? Who wants to see a film set in Aberdeen? Well, the film industry doesn't give a shit. I mean, by that I mean they don't care where you are set. They want a great story and a package. Now, if you were to give them a high concept conspiracy thriller about industrial espionage in the oil industry that happened to be set here, and you could cast George Clooney and whoever else, you could raise 40, 50, 60, 80 million dollars. If the script's good enough and the cast is good enough. It's the same things. I mean, I was chatting. I had a phone meeting last night with the company of one of probably the 5 most successful producers in the States in the last 30 years. And they're having me pitch on taking over and rewriting a project they've been developing, which is a remake of an old Charles Bronson, Alain Delon movie. And basically, I'm saying, well, where are you looking for it to be set? And they're like, well, you come up with that. Where do you think? They're totally open. It's like, just make it exciting. I mean, that's the way that it works. They're kind of looking to be and then they'll change it have it double for somewhere where there's tax breaks or something. But but it's just and that was the thing with the series. It seemed to me that when people would look at, I mean, I've spoken to other companies that have looked at Aberdeen in terms of developing series, and their attitude has been, always very sort of, well, what is Aberdeen? And things about the oil industry, they'd always think about the men, and they never think about the fact that there are a lot of women from the 4 corners of the world here related to it as well, some through marriage, some through work, and they're very different situations. And I thought it was very interesting that there's this whole culture going on here that nobody knows about. I mean, I was 2 years ago at a party about a block away from here, and it was 70% South American women. And that culture exists here. And to me, that's what's exciting about doing a series in dramas, when you're exploring things that isn't everyday, but is very interesting. Taking the audience into the world and exploring that whole playground, and that was really the genesis of it, and then seeing how the characters could interplay, and I've never in my life had so much fun writing something. They're looking at it. We have a follow-up meeting soon, and there's development money being raised, and it's almost all written. It's about a bit over 300 pages of probably about 380. So it'll be like 6 times 1 hour. So it's reasonably developed, and started exploring some casting things as well, because the thing with it is kind of interesting, because you would have thought that most people would think something shot in Aberdeen would have limited appeal, but the irony with the setup of this series is that it's got an opportunity for pre-sales beyond the majority of British television, because most of our cast we will be casting from overseas. So for example, if we cast a big name in Brazilian television who means something to HBO Latin America, or an Argentinian, then suddenly we're entering into discussions with markets that say they would go, a show like Spooks, they would go, well, okay, it's an entertaining show, but we'll see it when it's done. Where's the added interest for their local audience? And we should have probably, I mentioned, quite good success getting casting quite good names from those regions, because again, there's that added lure of doing something for a bigger TV market, sort of internationally, and something that will play into that realm. So, we're reasonably confident that we can package it quite nicely, so that our financing options aren't just purely the BBC. I mean, the ITV are broke, so they're not even, doesn't seem to even be a conversation people are having these days. And Sky will only adapt books and old series. They're not interested in original drama production. I mean, it's just the nature of it. So we'll be looking further afield for that. Yeah.
How do you feel? What do you think that you're going to do that in the future? Do you have time to edit this one?
Yeah, well, the sad thing with the Thunder Being Nation, in a sense, is that it's been something that I've been cutting between my features, and I kind of, other than I took about a year off between productions, production, post-production, marketing of the last 3 that I've done, because that's a problem when it's your own company. Your responsibility doesn't end with delivering the film. And so, and also editing a feature documentary where you're writing it from footage is a much bigger editing. I mean, it's a mammoth editing job, you know, because you're cutting down sort of 70, 80 hours of original footage. You know, whereas a movie, if you got 40, 50 hours, it's still off a 100 or 95 page script. So you know exactly what you're working off of. And so, you know, it's just been kind of an epic task. But you know, hopefully I'll have a bit of time. Well, actually, I say hopefully, maybe not hopefully, because it depends on what's going to spring forward. There's a couple of things that might spring in its way. But the good thing is at the moment, though, if I've been developing a relationship with a lot of people who have been buying Resbomb. We've been exploring direct distribution as a way where we can actually make much greater return, potentially. And we've been very much targeting an audience that are interested in American Indian cinema. And so the great thing is I'm beginning to get an understanding of roughly how many people I will be able to take a Thunder Being Nation out to when it's complete. And the great thing about that is it allows me to figure out how much resources to commit to it. So once I hit a tipping point with sales on Rasbomb, I will then say, well, now I can commit this amount of money to bring in somebody full time to, you know, to push the post further along and to accelerate that while I'm doing all these other things, or take on some of my other responsibilities as well. So that's kind of, you know, an interesting aspect of you know, that sort of self-distribution model in terms of how you can introduce new opportunities to it as well. Because you know, the irony with the Ticking Man is that it, you know, its distribution around the world, you know, there are a lot of people that have seen it, but I have no idea who they are for Retribution. It's a case of whether the same distributors want to take it on or not, and various other things. I mean, okay.